It makes me so angry.
Nothing seems to be going right today.
Today, I found some stories that'll stay with you. They're full of strange sightings and people who've done terrible things. These accounts show how dark the world can be.
In March of 2015, 68-year-old Tamara Samsonova was having renovations done to her home in St. Petersburg, Russia. A friend of hers, 79-year-old Valentina Ulanova, had heard about Tamara's renovations, and she approached her and said, "Do you want to stay with me while that's getting done?" Tamara was very thankful, immediately said yes, and as soon as she moved in, she immediately started picking up the slack by cleaning up the house and doing the dishes, and made sure she always cooked food for her friend because she wasn't able to pay rent. After a couple of weeks, the renovations on Tamara's home were complete, but Tamara didn't want to leave. She was really enjoying living with Valentina, and so she asked Valentina would it be okay if she stayed a little bit longer. Valentina was a little bit reluctant, but did ultimately say, okay, that's fine. A couple of months go by, and Tamara is showing no sign that she plans on leaving Valentina's home anytime soon, and Valentina is getting increasingly frustrated with that reality. Finally, in late July 2015, Valentina confronts Tamara and says, "You gotta go." And Tamara just says, "No, I'm not leaving." This causes a huge fight, but at the end of it, Tamara still doesn't leave. So for a couple of days, the women just do not speak to each other. The silence is finally broken on July 23rd when the women get into a fight about some empty cups in the sink that one of them was supposed to clean, but they didn't, and they fought about whose responsibility it was to do the dishes. And then of course, the whole subject comes up again of Valentina saying, "You shouldn't even be here, you need to leave." And Tamara's like, "No, I'm not gonna leave." And so another big blowout fight happens. But at the end of this fight, Tamara finally concedes and says, "Okay, I get it. I need to leave. Just give me a couple of days and I'll be out of your hair." Immediately, the tension is gone in the room. They're no longer fighting, and Valentina is happy that she's finally going to get her apartment back. And Tamara says, "Look, I'll make us dinner tonight. I'll go out and get some food." Tamara leaves the apartment and goes to a pharmacy and gets a whole bunch of sleeping pills. And then she gets the ingredients to a particular salad that she knows Valentina really likes. She goes back, she starts making dinner. And as she's making this salad, she crushes up the sleeping pills and mixes the powder with the salad dressing and gives that to Valentina. And Valentina, who's very hungry, eats the whole salad and doesn't notice anything is wrong. As soon as Tamara was sure Valentina had eaten the entire salad, Tamara just goes up to her room and goes to bed. A couple hours later, at about 2 in the morning, she goes back down to the kitchen and she sees Valentina is passed out on the ground. Tamara goes up to her and sees that she's still breathing, which was a disappointment because she wanted her to die from taking all these sleeping pills. But it doesn't matter. She takes out her hacksaw that she had borrowed from the neighbor earlier in the day and proceeds to butcher Valentina. And she makes special care as she's cutting her into pieces to remove her lungs and not damage them, because Tamara had a taste for human lungs. It was actually her favorite food. She took Valentina's head and she put it into a big pot of water and began boiling that to eat it. The rest of her was cut up into as small of pieces as she could get them and then wrapped in a shower curtain and placed in various bags. As Valentina's head and lungs are being cooked on the stovetop, Tamara begins making dozens of trips from the apartment, down the stairs, out the front door, all the way down to the lake that was near their property, where she would dispose of the body parts before coming back and getting more. Valentina's hips and legs were apparently too heavy to haul all the way down to the lake, so she took them to a nearby forest. Tamara's final trip sees her carrying a big silver pot, inside of which is Valentina's head, or at least whatever is left of it after Tamara was done eating most of it. 4 days later, on July 27th, a young couple that was living in the same apartment complex as Tamara and Valentina were out for a walk with their dog out near that lake. And as they're walking, their dog takes off running and stops in front of this huge bag that it's sniffing and pawing and trying to open. And the owners of the dog try to call it back, but they can't get it to get away from this bag. And so the owners walk over and they kind of poke the bag. They can see it's pretty heavy, and they open it up and they find a human torso, and it's Valentina's. When the police show up, the first thing they do is they go to Valentina's apartment, and they're surprised to find Tamara living there. And they're kind of sensitive with her, and they say, "Your friend, your relative, was just found deceased, and we need to look around the apartment." Tamara was completely indifferent. She did not care. They had just discovered her body, and she didn't care that they were searching the apartment. It was like she knew someday this was going to happen. During the search, the police officers quickly quickly find blood all over the bathroom and in the kitchen. They even find the hacksaw she used that's got blood on it. And they find Tamara's diary that's sitting next to this book about black magic. And the police are horrified when they see that the diary contains meticulous notes that Tamara had kept of all of the ritualistic killings she had perpetrated over the past 20 years. And there was 14 of them. And almost all of them were motivated by Tamara's desire to cast spells that she apparently was reading about in these black magic books she had. And virtually all of these spells required human flesh or other human components. And so she would kill these people, she would use their bodies to cast these spells, and then afterwards she would consume them. Not because that had anything to do with the spell, but because she liked the way people tasted, in particular, human lungs. The police arrest Tamara, who doesn't put up a fight. She says, "Yep, you got the right person. I did all this." While Tamara was on trial, she seemed like she was in a great mood. She told the judge, "I hope you give me a really severe punishment. I expect to die in prison." She was seen blowing kisses to reporters. It was like she was just totally out of touch. Or maybe she literally knew this was going to happen and just didn't care anymore. Tamara, who would be nicknamed the Granny Ripper by newspapers over the course of this trial, was given a life sentence, and to this day, she is still sitting in jail. Here is the surveillance footage of Tamara disposing of Valentina's body, as well as some shots of Tamara during her trial. After spending 21 years in the U.S. Army, a man retires and moves to Central Florida with his wife and young son. Although his family had plenty of money because he had a pension coming in and his wife still worked full-time, he just got bored really quickly after moving to Central Florida and decided he would just take a job doing something just to stay occupied. And so he ended up taking a job at a highway gas station. One of the primary reasons he chose this particular job is because the owners of the gas station didn't care if his son came along to help him stock shelves and hang out behind the cash register. And so for years, that's just how it went. The man would work at the gas station and his son would tag along. Even after his son became a teenager and you'd think might be wanting to do other things, well, the town was so small, there was almost nothing to do. So his son still came along well into his teenage years. One night in 1990, his son, who was 15 years old at the time, was at the station and he was actually taking a break sitting outside on a picnic table. He was reading a magazine, drinking a Mountain Dew, and it's dark out, and he notices out of the corner of his eye that there is a woman walking off of the highway towards the gas station. It was a very quiet night at the time, so there's no cars getting gas, there's nobody there, and there's not really anybody even driving on the highway, and so that's why she really stood out to him. And he turns and he notices her and he thinks to himself, no one ever walks to our gas station. We're on a highway. Everybody drives here. So she must have broken down and she must be coming here to try to use our phone to call a tow truck or something like that. So the woman is walking across the lot, coming closer and closer to the gas station, and the boy at this point has turned his attention back to his magazine, but he would say later that he kept looking up and keeping an eye on her because there was something off about her. The woman ultimately walks right behind him and goes in the door into the gas station. Doesn't acknowledge the boy, doesn't say hi to him, just walks straight inside, and she starts walking up and down the aisles of the gas station. Now, from where the boy was sitting, it's all glass, so he could clearly look in and see his father behind the counter, and he could see the head of this woman as she walked in and around all these aisles. And as soon as the woman was in the store, kind of pacing around the aisles, the boy put his magazine down and was just watching. And he noticed that she was not really shopping. She was just looking down for a few seconds, wouldn't pick anything up, so she wasn't buying anything. And she would look up at the counter where his father was, and she would just stare at him, and then she'd look back down at what she was doing, and she would go through all the aisles. And at some point, the woman just kind of abandons this phony, I'm pretending to shop routine, and just walks up to the counter. Now, nobody else is in the store, there's nobody else coming in, and so the boy could actually fairly clearly hear what she was saying to his father. And she told his father that she had broken down and she needed a ride, and could he drive her to Ocala, which was the next big town north of this gas station. And the boy would say that his father acted very strangely, because his father is normally incredibly pleasant with all the customers, he's very chatty even. Like, he talks to everybody who comes in the store. But as soon as this woman had gone in, his dad had seemed kind of dismissive and almost rude to this woman, and when she was talking to him, asking for a ride, he just said, "No, I won't give you a ride." The woman is annoyed by how quickly she's been shot down, but instead of just taking no for an answer, she turns and looks at the boy who's sitting out on the bench, who's looking right at her, and she points at the boy, and she says, "What about him? Is he your son? Can he give me a ride?" The boy notices that his father, who's not within her eyesight, is looking at his son going, "No." Like, whatever she wants from you, you're gonna say no to it. And the boy's a little bit confused by this because he's still trying to understand why his dad was so against helping this woman, because she clearly needs our help or someone's help. But he just took his dad at face value, and when the woman's pointing at him, he knew, the boy, that if she came over and asked him, he would say no. But it wouldn't come to that, because the boy's father would say to the woman, no, my son's not going to give you a ride. You need to leave here immediately. Do not come back. Leave. We're not going to help you. She's furious. She's cussing him out. She storms out and slams the door. She starts cussing at the boy, and she walks off. The whole time she's turning around and flipping them off and screaming profanities at them, but she ultimately walks off, and the dad kind of followed her out and is standing next to his son as she walks off. And the boy asks his dad, like, what was her deal? Why did that happen? Why did you not want to help her? And the dad just said, I don't know. There was something off about her, and I don't know how to place it, but I did not want her around you. I knew I didn't want to give her a ride. I knew she had to go. A year later, the boy is in his room when he hears his dad in the other room yelling for him to come in here and look at the TV. So he runs into the TV room, and on the TV is the same woman from the gas station, better known as Eileen Wuornos. She was a serial killer who used to pick up her male victims at gas stations in Florida. It's unclear whether the boy or the boy's father were her next victims. But by the time she had shown up at that gas station, she'd already killed 4 people. And following that interaction with them at the gas station, she had gone on to kill 3 more people, including someone in Ocala, Florida, which was the town she had asked them to give her a ride to. Eileen had been caught, that's why she was on TV, and she was later sentenced to death.
Tamara was blowing kisses at the camera in the middle of her trial. She looked like she was having the time of her life while they were talking about her eating people. The diary they found is definitely the worst part. She wrote down every detail about those persons for 20 years. It's like a grocery list for her. Then there's that dad in the gas station. He just felt something off about Aileen and wouldn't let his son near her. Most people try to be helpful, but his gut told him to stay away. That feeling probably saved their life, because she was looking for her next target.
Nothing seems to be going right today, so I'm gonna just slow the day down. I'm gonna tell you a little story of what happened to me in the bathroom of the haunted house I was living in Japan. Let's get it. Also, I cut my finger. I need to slow down in life. I'm making so many easy mistakes. Okay, here we go. Story time. Now, in the mornings before school, I would always wake up earlier than everyone else because I'm not sure if it's obvious, but I was one of those scene girls in high school. And that meant that I needed to tease my hair, put on a bunch of eyeliner. It was a whole ordeal. So I would wake up early before my family to go downstairs on the main floor to the half bath. It was a half bath. It had a toilet and it had a sink. It had a mirror. It had a door. All right, it's a very tiny bathroom. The only other bathroom was in the basement where my parents sleep. We're not doing that early in the morning. So I would go to the half bath. And for some reason, this one morning, I go in the bathroom and I close the door. And I'm doing my makeup, okay? I'm all up in the mirror, doing my wingtip eyeliner. And for some reason, the bathroom mirror started fogging. There's no shower. There's no hot running water. It started fogging up. So I back up a little bit and I go, that's weird. And I wipe it down. Wipe. And I go back. I just ignore it. It's really early in the morning. I ignore it. I go back in. I'm doing my eyeliner. A couple minutes later, as I'm switching to my other eye, it fogs up again. Weird, right? And this time I'm like, okay. I wipe it down and I take a minute and I look around and I'm like, okay, where could this be coming from? Makes absolutely no sense. And as I lean in, sorry, this story is like so uncomfortable to talk about. As I lean in to do my eyeliner now on my left eye, the light shut off. It shut off. And I was like, that's weird, right? Did like something trip? What happened? I go to try to turn the light on. The lights aren't working. I go to grab the door handle of the bathroom to get out of the bathroom and finish my makeup in the kitchen or something. I don't know. I grab the door handle and it's locked. But it only locks from the inside. And I didn't lock the door. I closed it. And I'm trying to mess with the lock. I grab the door handle. And the way the door handle was stuck, it wasn't like I'm turning it and it just won't open. It wasn't like a stuck door. The handle itself wouldn't turn. It was like grabbing just a solid door handle and just like it wouldn't budge. And I'm in the dark and I'm locked in the bathroom. And in that moment, I lost my fucking mind. And I start banging on the door and I go, get me the fuck out of here. And I wasn't yelling at my parents or my sister because they're still asleep. I was yelling at whatever is fucking with me. And I was really upset at this time. And as I'm banging, I'm like, get me the fuck out of here. And I go to grab the door handle. It turns and I walk out and I look back at the bathroom. And I hear my mom walking up the stairs as she's like, what the hell is going on? And I told her, I said, the light shut off, the door locked, the mirror fogged. And she walks in the bathroom. She's looking around. She goes to flip on the light. The light turns on. The light turns on. She's looking at the mirror. The mirror is perfectly fine. She goes to close the door and unlock it, open it, and she looks at me and she was like, it's fine. And I was like, no, it's not fine. Something locked me in there. Something shut off the lights. It's not fine. So what I did was went in there, grabbed my makeup bag, just one arm. That's mine. Went into the kitchen, sat down at the kitchen table, finished up my eyeliner, went upstairs to go get my backpack for school and put my makeup bag away. When I walk into my bedroom, my backpack that was sitting on the chair at my little writing desk was sitting in the middle of my bed, perfectly right on top. And I was like, I didn't fucking put you there. I didn't put you there. You were on my desk chair. And I know that because I was packing up my homework at my desk to put into my backpack. And I left it there, grabbed my makeup bag, and went downstairs. But it was sitting perfectly on the middle of my bed. And I grabbed my fucking backpack. And I don't look back. And I walk down the stairs and I walk out of the house. I didn't even have breakfast at the house, you guys. I just left the house. Gone. And I got myself a little vending machine coffee. And I stopped by the little Kobini. And I grabbed myself a little breakfast. And I sat at the bus stop. And I had my breakfast and I drank my coffee. I wasn't going to spend another second in that house that morning. And my mom walks up with my sister because I'm supposed to walk to the bus with my sister in the morning and I walk home with my sister in the morning. My mom walks up with my sister sometime later and she was just like, what the hell is all that about? And I was like, I'm not spending another second in that house this morning.
She's in that tiny bathroom just trying to do her eyeliner. And then the mirror starts fogging up. It's so weird because there's no water anywhere near her. It felt like something was breathing right over her shoulder while she was looking at herself. Then the door handle just stops moving altogether. I'd lose my head if I was trapped in the dark like that. Finding her backpack on her bed later is easily the strangest part. That thing from the bathroom followed her upstairs. Now she knows it can move things around whenever it wants to. It's surely watching her.
Do you guys remember in 2023 seeing this picture? I remember this was all over my For You page of this girl driving her car that resulted in a collision that ended the life of this bride on her wedding day. She passed away in her wedding dress. And the behavior of the girl after the fact, you're not gonna like her, I'll just say that. Samantha Miller was 34 years old from Charlotte, North Carolina. April 28th of 2023 at Foley Beach in South Carolina was the most special day of her entire life. It was her wedding day. She married the love of her life, 36-year-old Eric Hutchinson, in a beach wedding. And that day, as often is for a lot of people on their wedding day, was incredibly meaningful to them. Eric said that it was the best night of his life. The two of them have been together since 2019, but from day one of their relationship, Samantha knew that Eric was the guy that she would marry. Her family adored Eric and his his family also completely fell in love with Samantha. She's been described as someone who had a magnetic pull to those around her because she was such a happy, energetic, positive person that just by being around her, you would automatically leave in a better mood than when you first saw her. And their wedding day was everything they could have hoped for and more. Surrounded by friends and family at the end of the night, just after 10 p.m., Samantha and Eric hopped on a golf cart. They were both sitting at the back when she looked at him and said, "I want this day to last forever." In the car was also Benjamin Garrett and his 17-year-old son. They were driving Samantha and Eric back to their Airbnb for the first night as newlyweds, but they would not make it. 20 minutes into their drive, the golf cart was driving at approximately 25 miles per hour when they were struck by a vehicle driving 65 miles per hour, completely crushing the golf cart, flipping it over on its side, and sending all 4 people that were in the cart flying in the air up to 100 yards away from the crash. Around the same time, Samantha's mother and sister had made it back to where they were staying that was pretty close by to where the crash happened, and they started to hear the utter chaos. Police sirens, ambulances with their sirens on and lights on, rushing over to the accident. Samantha's mom heard the sound of an ambulance, and something in her gut told her that something bad had happened to her daughter. As soon as she heard the commotion, she started running barefoot towards where the noise was coming from, screaming out for her daughter. Neighbors described hearing the crash as not only one of the worst sounds that they had ever heard, but also one of the loudest. And the crime scene was horrific. Samantha's mom, Lisa, was still unaware of who exactly was hurt and to what extent. But knowing that all 4 people that were once in the golf cart were about to be transferred over to the hospital, she rushed over there to be there when Samantha arrived. Benjamin, his son, Samantha, and Eric all suffered extensive injuries. Their injuries were so terrible and there were so many of them that it was hard to tell exactly what each person had wrong with them at the crash. They were fading in and out. It was pure chaos, pure panic. All 4 of them were placed in ambulances to rush them over to the hospital. All ambulances had their sirens on, driving as fast as possible to get them to the medical attention that they very much needed. But there was one ambulance that was not driving with the same urgency as the others. One ambulance that did not have their sirens nor their lights on. That one was the one that Samantha Miller was in, and they were driving with their sirens and their lights off because it was too late. Samantha had already passed. 34-year-old Samantha Miller had been pronounced deceased on her wedding night in her wedding dress after living the happiest day of her entire 34 years on this earth. Her brother Benjamin was also rushed into emergency surgery. He would luckily make it, and his 17-year-old son would be okay as well. Eric Hutchinson was also taken into surgery and then placed in critical care. Doctors were not sure if he was going to be able to make it through the night, but luckily he would. And when he did eventually wake up, he did not remember anything in regards to the crash. But he woke up, looked at his mom's face, and could immediately tell that something was wrong. The first thing that he asked was, "Where's Sammy? Where's Sammy?" That's when the news of Samantha's loss was given to him, and devastated does not even come close to describing what he must have felt in that moment. Back at the scene, the first thing was figuring out what happened and why, and the answers were right in front of them. The gray Toyota Camry, also completely destroyed, was right in front of them, as was the person who was driving the car, 25-year-old Jamie Lee Komorowski. She was left completely unharmed. That night, Jamie had been out by herself, stopping by different restaurants, consuming a lot of beverages, too many, one after another, and after every single one, she would pay for her tab, hop in her car, and drive herself to the next place. She had so many that when she was tested, her results came back to be over 3 times the legal limit. And just by looking at the state of her, it was obvious that she wasn't right because of her behavior. Like I mentioned, she was driving at 65 miles per hour on a road where the speed limit was 25 miles per hour. And even after the crash, she was so completely unaware of the damage that she had just caused, jumping out of her car saying, "Something hit me, something hit me." And when officers got there to talk to her, Jamie said that yes, she had been out that night, but she said that she just wanted to go home. She just wanted to talk to her boyfriend, and she wanted to go home because she did nothing wrong. She said that she was driving home, which makes no sense because she was driving the complete opposite direction. And when they put her in handcuffs, she had to be told 3 different times why she was being arrested. Before answering any further questions or cooperating with officers at all for that matter, Jamie asked for an attorney, and she was taken to the station for questioning, where she was charged with 3 counts of felony driving resulting in great bodily harm or death and 1 count of reckless homicide. And while she was in custody, the way that Jamie would talk to her dad on their recorded phone calls is so incredibly disturbing because she was fully making it out to seem like she was the victim in this situation, showing such a concerning and alarming lack of remorse. She would say to her dad, "I can't believe this is my life. My whole life is going to be over. I want it to be over. Why me? Why me?" She said, "Oh my God, I just can't believe this happened to me. Why me? I'm going to be here for years and years and years and years. Why is the media so involved in this case? Everybody is going to be so mean to me when I get out of here. Ugh." and her dad would tell her to tough it up and suck it up. He told her that she likely was going to have to do time, but that things would be okay because they would figure it out, saying, quote, "You don't need to be sorry, Jamie. There's nothing to be sorry about. This is what happened, and we are going to take care of it. We don't care about what happened. We don't care. We care only about you," end quote. And he also said that it's unfortunate that, quote, "bad things happen to wonderful people," end quote, referring to his daughter getting arrested and saying that's what happened, and then telling her that all she had to do was make the best out of the situation. I'm sorry. I get that you want to be there for your daughter, fully understand that. If you want to be there for her, show her that you support her, fine. But do not lie to her face and tell her that what happened was not her fault. Do not sit there, look her in the face, lie to her and tell her that this was an accident when what it was a direct consequence of her own actions and her own decisions. And I think it shows a clear picture of the kind of people that both Jamie and her father are for attempting to minimize the situation and for making it sound like Jamie was the victim in this situation, a situation that she put herself in, mind you, and a situation that she had full control over and would not have happened if she would not have gone behind the wheel of her car. Jamie tried to get out on bail, her dad assuring her that her future would be okay and that she would be totally fine and that she did not have to worry about her future, which led to Jamie asking if her parents were going to be there to pick her up when she got out of bail because she did not think that she was going to go to prison. She told them she was excited to be able to go back home because then all of this could be over. And to that, her mother said, "That's great, baby, that's great." Jamie's dad was very wealthy. Because of that, they were able to afford a very good attorney, but ultimately, one thing remains true, and that is that nobody else but her was at fault fully for the accident. Jamie Lee Komorowski, at 27 years old, eventually pled guilty to her charges in a courtroom, acknowledging that she had mental health struggles that caused her to act the way that she did, saying that she was, quote, "devastated and deeply ashamed and sorry," end quote, for what she did. She said, quote, "I wish I could go back and undo this terrible tragedy, but I cannot. I will live the rest of my life with intense regret for what happened that night," end quote. She was sentenced to 25 years in a South Carolina state prison. As a result of a financial settlement reached in connection to the crash, Samantha's husband, Eric, is also to receive $863,000. Samantha's parents have since then spoken out, saying that they will never be capable of forgiving Jamie, knowing that her actions took away the person they loved most. And Eric Hutchinson has spoken out, remembering Samantha, saying, quote, "On the golf cart, she told me she didn't want the night to end and I kissed her on her forehead. And the next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital," end quote. In regards to Jamie, he has said, quote, "I do think she's sorry. However, that does not change the fact that Sam's not here. My wife's not here. The family we planned, all of our injuries. So that will take some time for sure," end quote. It makes me so angry. It makes me so angry, not only for Samantha and her family and her husband, but for every single person that has ever lost someone or has gone very badly injured because a person that should not have been driving decided to get behind the wheel of the car. It's absurd.
Jamie Lee Komorowski's phone call from jail are heartless. She sits there complaining about her life being over while a family just buried a bride. It's awful how she only cares about herself and the media attention. Then her dad tells her she doesn't need to be sorry. How can you say that when she killed someone? Poor husband woke up and asked for his wife only to find out she's gone forever. I don't know how anyone could be so selfish. She's worried about people being mean to her when she gets out. That's just wrong. She has no heart.
Let's do one more story about something spooky happening in the woods. This came from Richard, and he says he was hunted by what he believes to be the apex predator near where he used to live in the panhandle of Idaho, about 50 miles south of the Canadian border. And he's still not sure what this apex predator is, but strangely enough, it started respecting him and leaving him gifts when he started leaving it offerings. A little bit of background on Richard. He said he is very competent in the woods. He spent the majority of his adult life as a combat and wilderness survival instructor. Also been an outfitter and avid backpacker, spending weeks at a time in the woods. Been a wilderness hunting and fishing fly guide and spent the majority of his life in the backcountry of several Pacific Northwest states and California. All of that is just a lot of words to describe the way that Richard thinks. He said he has always laughed anytime people tell him about creepy or unexplained things that happened in the woods because he can always find a logical explanation. He said he's heard about every cryptid and urban legend that exists in those woods, and he can find a natural cause for all of those stories. For example, if you've never heard a red fox's call and you hear it without knowing what you're listening to, it will turn your blood cold. He said, look it up. Still has no explanation for what he encountered when he moved to an off-grid homestead with his family a few years ago. Property was surrounded by thousands and thousands of forested acres, and he said his family owned about 80 acres of that, but he had permission from the owners of the surrounding areas, and he spent most of his days out hunting or foraging for wild mushrooms. And one day, one of his friends came over about 6 months after his family moved in, and he points at a structure in the trees across the street from Richard's property, and he says, "That's a Bigfoot structure." Richard said he really respected his friend. He's also an avid outdoorsman, but he didn't believe in Bigfoot. But he knew that this friend of his, who, despite knowing the woods like the back of his hand, spent a lot of his free time researching Bigfoot and even leading expeditions to try to find him or at least prove his existence. It's like a hobby's a hobby, whatever floats his boat, it's just not my cup of tea. And he kind of laughs this off. And his friend's like, "I know you don't believe me, but they put those up to mark their territory, and you should avoid going over into that part of the woods." But Richard said he was absolutely right. He did ignore his warning, and he continued going into that patch of woods to forage for wild mushrooms. It was one of his prime areas where he would gather and find things he needed for the homestead. Day that spring, he packed up his things and he headed out to find the first mushrooms of the season. He said it was still cold enough that there were a few patches of snow on the ground, but he headed to that area toward a spot where he knew that they grew thick, and he found it, and they were there as he expected, and he started picking. But after a few minutes, he felt extremely disoriented. This was very unusual for me because I knew those woods like the back of my hand, and I was just out of sight of my pasture fence. He shook his head and decided to play it safe because after years of hearing search and rescue stories, he knew that he should head back to where he could see his fence and knew where he was. He headed back toward the direction from which he came, but he still felt lost. He said the plants were right, but the topography of the earth was all wrong. Even though he was alone, he felt lost and confused and embarrassed. He said normally I was the guy that was called when somebody was lost, and here I was, lost on my own property. After wandering for a few more minutes and still unable to figure out where he was, he decided to try an old trick that an old Cherokee man he called Grandpa taught him. And he said that this trick is to bend over and look between your legs toward the direction from which you came, and all of a sudden you will know where you're at. He said, I don't know how or why it works, but it does. So he tried that, it did work, and he all of a sudden knew where he was again. As he started to head back toward his pasture, he saw another patch of mushrooms, and he was like, well, I may as well grab these while I'm out here. And he started picking. And before he knew it, about another hour had passed. And that's when he heard a rustling in the trees, and he was aware that he was being hunted by something. He said he has been hunted by mountain lions in the past, and it's a very unsettling feeling, but he did not go out unprepared. He did have his firearm. He didn't think that whatever was hunting him this time was a mountain lion because it was midday and they're not usually out at that hour. But he figured out which direction it was coming from and headed in that direction because he said strategy says that you should meet an ambush. You shouldn't run from it. You should let whatever's hunting you see that you know it's there. As he headed in that direction, he caught sight of what he thought was a bear standing behind a tree. But he said it wasn't the right shape of a bear, but that's the only thing that made sense in my brain. Whatever it was standing on two legs and it was tall. He looked down to check the position of his firearm, and when he looked up, the thing was gone. He made his way over to the tree to look at the tracks, and he said he was very confused because whatever tracks it was wasn't a bear, but he had never seen anything like it. He heard another noise coming from the tree line, and so he turned in that direction, drew his firearm, and charged. And he said the speed at which this thing ran from him was crazy. It crashed through the bushes. He actually spent a few hours tracking it, though he never caught sight of it again. Eventually, though, it got dark, and he said he headed back. He said he would have liked to figure out what he was tracking. That thing was undoubtedly bigger and stronger and could see better in the dark than he could. He was feeling unsettled by the time he reached his house and locked up the house, even though they lived in an area where he said that's not really necessary. And he did not sleep well that night. But in the morning, he got up, he fed his kids, and he headed outside to chop some wood. He headed to a large stack of rounds that he had next to a property fence, but when he got out there, he was very confused because on the rounds of wood was a large cluster of the types of mushrooms he had been hunting the day before. There were so many that he was able to fill 3 5-gallon buckets with this type of mushroom. He said he checked them out carefully to make sure that they were the type that he had been looking for because some of the mushrooms in that family are poisonous, but he was sure. He picked them, and he was very confused because he hadn't noticed them the day before, but was like, maybe they sprung up and I just missed them somehow. Later that day, he called his friend, the one that was super into Bigfoot, and he was telling him about what he was tracking in the woods the day before, and he was like, do you know what kind of animal that could have been? And his friend's like, oh, I don't know. I've never heard of anything like that. And then Richard tells him about the mushrooms, and his friend gets really excited, and he's like, oh my gosh, they left you an offering. He said you have to leave them an offering back so they know that you're peaceful. Says they really like guts and innards and things like that. And Richard says, I don't know about all that, but he was curious. So the next week they did have some leftovers from an animal. And so he says he took them out there and he put them on the other side of the fence from the stack of wood that he had been chopping a week prior. And out the next morning to check to see if anything had gotten it, he was shocked because the offering was gone, but in its place was another cluster of mushrooms. This went on for months. Anytime Richard had something extra to spare, he would leave it by the fence and he would find gifts left in return. He said whatever this was far more intelligent than any animal I've ever encountered. He and his family noticed that whenever they were outside on their property, they would all feel the same sensation of being watched, not by one creature, but by many. He said it never felt aggressive, and it went on for several years until eventually, sadly, his marriage fell apart and they seemed to leave. Richard says to this day, he's not exactly sure what was living on his property and watching his family. But when he hears stories about strange things happening in the woods, he's not as skeptical as he used to be. That I believe now that there are things out there beyond my understanding. But whatever relationship I developed with whatever was on my property was cool, and I'm grateful for that experience. He said it felt like our homestead was, for a period, guarded by the apex predator of that area, even though I'm not sure what that was. Richard's his real name. He'll be seeing the comments. Let him know what you think. And he's curious if anyone has any other stories, especially from this area, dealing with something like this. Or if you've ever heard about leaving an offering and then something leaving you a gift in exchange.
Richard was an expert who knew the woods well. So hearing he felt lost on his own property is a lot to take in. I mean, he said the plants were right, but the ground was wrong. And that's exactly how people describe those glitchy moments in the forest. Then there's the exchange. Leaving animal guts as peace offering is some serious business. You walk out the next morning and find a huge bucket of mushrooms just waiting for you. This thing was pretty much paying him rent. It's one thing to see a shadow, but getting physical gifts back from some unknown creature is so much different.
Ghosts have boundaries, and if you don't respect them, they'll come for you. I need to tell you about my uncle's farmhouse in Tennessee because I have never fully made peace with what happened there, and I've been carrying it around for about 20 years now. My uncle Robert bought the property in the early 90s, about 40 acres of land with a farmhouse built sometime in the 1920s. The previous owner was an elderly man who had lived there alone for the last 30 years of his life. He had no family that anyone in the area could identify. No visitors. Neighbors described him as someone who kept entirely to himself, who they would sometimes see sitting on the front porch at odd hours, late at night, early in the morning, but he never waved and never spoke to anyone. He had died in the house, alone, and based on the condition of things when the estate finally settled, he had been dead for several days before anyone found him. He was found in the rocking chair in the front room by the window. My uncle knew all of this when he bought the property. He wasn't the superstitious type. The rocking chair had been left with the house. My uncle kept it in the same corner by the same front window where it had always been because it fit the room and because he was not the kind of person who thought too hard about where furniture came from. He should have burned it. I was 9 the first summer we visited. I felt something wrong the moment I walked into the front room and saw the chair. There was no logic to it. It was a wooden chair in a corner, but something in my 9-year-old nervous system looked at that chair and sent up a flare, and I spent the rest of that visit avoiding the front room entirely. Second summer, I was 10. I was sharing a room at the back of the house with my older brother, Danny. 50 feet of original hardwood hallway separated our room from the front room. That floor talked constantly. Every step registered, every creak announced itself. You could not move through the house at night without the floor telling on you. Which is why what woke me on the third night of the visit was immediately deeply wrong. It wasn't a footstep. It was a rhythm, slow and even, coming from the front of the house. A rocking, creaking rhythm, forward and back, patient and steady, like something that had been doing it for a very long time and intended to keep doing it. I lay in bed and I listened, and the sound did not stop and did not change pace and did not do anything a house settling in the night would do, because houses don't settle in perfect 4-time rhythm for 20 minutes straight. I got up. I don't know why. My body was terrified. I got up anyway. I walked down the 50-foot hallway towards the front room, and with every step, the rocking got louder and more distinct and more real, and I had ample opportunity to turn around, and I did not take it because I was 10 years old and something in me needed to know. The front room was dark, was moving, weighted and deliberate, rocking forward and back the way a chair rocks when someone is sitting in it. Not drifting, not slowing, controlled, like something was keeping the rhythm intentionally. There was nobody in it. I stood in the doorway and I watched it, and I want to tell you that I was brave, but what I actually was unable to move. Completely unable. My feet were on the floor and my hand was on the door frame, and I watched that empty chair rock in the dark, and then it turned. Not all at once, slowly, the way a chair turns when the person sitting in it shifts their weight and pivots to face a different direction. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, a short, quiet, deliberate sound, and when it stopped moving, the chair was no longer angled towards the window. It was facing the doorway. It was facing me. The room was silent, the chair was still, and I was standing in that doorway at 2 a.m, and something I could not see had just turned to look at me. I ran. I got back to the bedroom and I got into bed and I pulled the covers over my head and I lay there and listened. And after about 5 minutes, I heard the rocking start again. Slow and patient and steady. Forward and back, forward and back. It rocked until almost 4 a.m. I know because I watched the clock. In the morning, I told my Aunt Carol. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting and she said, "How close did you get to the doorway?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "It was just a dream." Not, "There's a rational explanation." She asked how close I'd gotten to the doorway. I told her I stood right in it, that I'd had my hand on the frame. She closed her eyes briefly and then opened them and looked at me very directly and said, "Don't ever go past the doorway. Do you understand me? You can look from the doorway, but you do not go past it. Promise me." I asked her once years later when I was old enough to ask why the doorway mattered, why that specific line. She said that in the years she and my uncle had lived in that house, she had learned that whatever was in that room stayed in that room as long as nobody crossed the threshold at night. That it seemed to have a boundary and it seemed to respect the boundary, and they had learned to respect it in return. I asked her what had happened the one time the boundary hadn't been respected. She said, "Your uncle doesn't sleep well anymore. He hasn't since the second year we lived here." My uncle sold the property 8 years ago. The night before the moving truck came, I asked him if he was going to tell the new owners about the chair. He thought about it for a long time, and then he said, "I moved it to the garage about a year ago. Thought maybe if it wasn't in the room, things would be different."
My heart sank when that chair started turning away from the window. Being in the dark at 10 years old and realizing something you can't even see is now looking right at you is just too much. I'd have been out of that house so very fast. It gets way worse because the uncle thought he could just stick the chair in the garage to fix everything. He didn't realize that by moving the chair, he was just inviting whatever was sitting in that chair to just find a new spot. And knowing that something started walking down the hallway instead, it's just enough to keep me wide awake here tonight.
In early 1983, residents of the Cranley Gardens apartment complex in North London began complaining about their drains being clogged up. Initially, their landlord was dismissive and said, "Oh, it's just an old building, it's old plumbing, and that's why it's slow." But eventually, the landlord conceded and asked a plumber to come out and have a look. And so, on the evening of February 8th, an experienced plumber named Mike came out to Cranley Gardens, and after learning what the complaints were, he went around to the side of the building and he opened up a drain cover to have a look inside. As expected, when he shined his light down, he saw wads of hair and napkins and other things kind of mashed together, clogging up the pipes. And so he reached in and he began pulling the stuff out and putting it in a bucket right next to him. And then after he had cleared the majority of the obstruction, he reached his arm all the way into this pipe to feel around to see if there was anything in there that he just couldn't see. And at some point, as he was reaching, when his arm was almost completely into this pipe, his hand hit a major blockage. And so he moved his fingers around to try to feel what it was, but he couldn't tell. It was something that was fairly soft, but there were some hard things inside of it, like sticks or rods. So he grabbed a handful of this blockage and he pulled his arm back out of the pipe. He opened his hand and what he was holding looked like ground meat, but it wasn't any meat he had ever seen before. And inside of this fleshy substance looked like little bits of bone. Now, Mike had cleared many pipes before and he had never seen meat be the reason for a blockage. And so this whole situation just seemed really strange, and he decided, it's late, I'll just come back tomorrow with my supervisor so he can see what this is too. So Mike puts the cap back on the drain pipe and he walks out from behind the building back out towards his truck parked on the road. And as he's walking, two of the residents of this complex come out and they say, "Hey, did you fix the blockage? What was it?" And Mike would say no, he hadn't. And then he just kind of blurted out that there was meat in the pipes. That was what was causing the blockage. And then one of these two residents says, "Well, I bet people are just flushing their Kentucky Fried Chicken down the drains. That's what's causing it." And Mike looked at him and he was like, "Yeah, maybe." And then he just turned around, got in his truck, and he drove away. Early the next morning, Mike and his supervisor came back to Cranley Gardens, and they went around to the side of the building, they undid that cap, and then Mike reached down inside expecting to feel this blockage, but where it should have been, there was nothing. Somebody had cleared the pipes. And so Mike and his supervisor are looking at each other, and Mike is like, there's no way that cleared on its own. Someone had to have come out here and cleared it, but I don't know why they would have done that and still had us come out. But the men decide, you know what, maybe by chance it did just kind of slip through and cleared itself, so let's just continue the process and make sure each of the apartment buildings, their individual pipe is unobstructed. And when they checked these pipes, they found all of them were clear except for one, apartment number 23, whose pipe was blocked up with more of this meaty substance. Mike and his partner were already very suspicious of the fact that someone had snuck out here in the middle of the night and cleared the pipe. Probably. They didn't know if that happened, but it seemed likely. And now they're finding more of this weird meat substance coming from a particular apartment. And so the whole situation just seemed off. And so they told the landlord that they were not going to touch this. Somebody else had to come out and deal with this. And the landlord, after finding out there was meat jammed in the pipes, got really freaked out and called the police. The police showed up, they pulled this meat substance out of the pipes, and they sent it to a mortuary where a pathologist looked at it and said, this is meat. It's human meat. And in particular, the stuff that was pulled out of apartment number 23's pipes is that of a human neck. So the police go back to Cranley Gardens, they go up to apartment number 23, they knock on the door, and when the door opens, they're hit with this overwhelming stench of just rotting flesh. And standing in the doorway of this apartment, the owner of the apartment, is this guy who's in his late 30s, early 40s, who introduces himself as Dennis Nielsen. And they say, hey, Dennis, can we have a look around your apartment? And he says, you know, why? And they say, well, we found human remains in your pipes. And Dennis immediately says, oh my goodness, I can't believe that. That's horrible. But the police are not buying it, and they say, you know what, Dennis, tell us where the rest of the body is. And at this, Dennis suddenly went expressionless, emotionless, and he just turns around and he points into his bedroom and he says, it's in 2 plastic bags in my closet. And so before the police go into his apartment to go inspect these bags, they say, Dennis, are there any other bodies in your apartment that we should know about? And Dennis sighs and he looks up to the ceiling and says, yeah, there's about 15 or 16 here. It's a long story. It goes way back. I'd love to tell it to you, get this off my chest, and I'll do it at the police station. So after Dennis was arrested and brought to the station, he told them his horrible story. It had all started 5 years earlier in 1978 when Dennis was 33. He was at a pub having some drinks by himself when a teenager came into the bar and attempted to buy an alcoholic drink, and he was denied service. And so Dennis pulled him aside and said, hey, I'd be happy to give you a drink at my apartment. It's right down the road. And the young man, whose name was Steven, was very excited about this and said, great, let's go. Once they arrived back and they were up in Dennis's apartment, the pair had lots of drinks and they were having fun and laughing. And then at some point, the pair climbed into bed together. The next morning, when Dennis got up, his new friend, Steven, was still sleeping right next to him. And he had this sudden, overwhelming sense of dread because he knew as soon as Steven woke up, he would see this as a one-night stand and he would just leave. He would not stick around and remain friends with Dennis. And Dennis just did not like that idea. He wanted Steven to stay. And so he looked on the ground next to the bed and he saw the necktie that Steven had been wearing was on the ground. And so he got on the ground, he grabbed the necktie, he fashioned it into a noose, and then he climbed back on the bed, got on top of Steven's chest, and he looped the tie around his neck, and then he pulled it as tight as he could. And as soon as it was tight, Dennis would tell police that Steven came alive, and he began reaching for his neck and kicking Dennis as hard as he could, but he just can't get it off. And at some point, Dennis said Steven just seemed to give up. He looked up at Dennis and knew he wasn't going to get this off and that Dennis was determined to kill him. And so Steven just allowed himself to go limp, and then he slouched over. And as soon as that happened, Dennis said he relaxed. But as he's looking at Steven, he realized he wasn't dead. He was just unconscious. And so Dennis goes into the kitchen and he gets this huge plastic bucket and he fills it up with water and he sets it in the middle of his kitchen floor. And then he gets a bunch of kitchen chairs and he lines them up like a table right in front of this bucket of water. And then he drags Steven's body into the kitchen and he lays him on his back on these chairs, but makes sure his head is not resting on the chair. His head is kind of dangling off the back of these chairs. And then he grabbed that bucket of water and he slid it right underneath Stephen's head. And then Dennis got on top of the chairs, on top of Stephen, and then he pressed the young man's face straight down so his head went backwards until his mouth and his nose were under the water. And Dennis held him like that until Stephen regained consciousness, but again, he didn't fight it. He knew he was doomed. And after several minutes, the bubbles stopped coming to the surface and Stephen was dead. Dennis pulled his victim off of the chairs. He brought him into the living room and he sat him on a chair. And then Dennis went into the kitchen and he made himself a cup of coffee and he smoked some cigarettes. And then he just stood in the doorway and looked at Stephen's body. And he would tell police it was a very bizarre experience because Stephen still looked like he was alive. In fact, Dennis would try talking to him as if he was going to talk back, but obviously he didn't. And at some point, Dennis realized, the life he had before he killed Stephen was now over. He had a new life and he didn't really know how to handle it. And so the first thing he thought to do was to clean Stephen. So he took Stephen's body and he brought him into the bathroom and he gave him a very long bath, cleaned his body, cleaned his hair. And then afterwards he got him out, he dressed him and put him into his bed. And then Dennis climbed into bed with him and laid with him. And he would tell police as he laid there, he suddenly felt overjoyed. Stephen was not going to leave him. He was going to stay here as long as Dennis wanted him to. After laying with him for some time, Dennis realized he had to find a way to hide Stephen's body in his apartment so no one could find him. And so he left his apartment and he went to a hardware store where he got an electric knife and a big storage bin. And he brought them back to his apartment, and as he was about to cut Stephen up, he just couldn't go through with it. So instead, he just climbed into bed and took a nap next to Stephen's body. When he got up again, he moved Stephen's body onto the ground in his living room and covered him with a blanket. And then he went and made dinner and then sat in his chair in the living room right next to this body on the ground and watched TV for a while. When he was done watching TV and eating, he looked at the body on the floor and realized, he really hadn't made any progress in terms of hiding him somewhere in his apartment. And that's when he remembered he had a loose floorboard in his apartment. And so he went over to the loose floorboard, he pulled it up and he saw there was a space under the floors. And so he pulled a couple more boards up and then he grabbed Stephen's body and he attempted to force him down into this space. But by now, Stephen's body had begun to stiffen up from rigor mortis. Specifically, his arms were outstretched like a Y over his head. And so as Dennis is trying to force him down in there, his arms were not allowing him to go down into that small space. So Dennis took Stephen's body and he propped him up against the wall in his bedroom. So the body is against the wall, rigid, standing up with its arms up over its head, and Stephen's eyes were still open. And then after that, Dennis just got in bed and fell asleep. So all night, this corpse is staring at Dennis in his bed. And then the next morning when Dennis got up, there was Stephen still up against the wall with his hands in the air looking down at him. Dennis grabbed Stephen's body and put it on the ground, and he began yanking and jerking and pulling on each of Stephen's arms until they were pinned down by his side. And then after that, Dennis started working on his legs and his hips, and he began contorting him until he was small enough that he could pack him down under his floor. And then once he was under there, he just put the boards on top and went about his daily life. And for the next couple of days, he totally forgot about Stephen. But a week after putting him under the floor, Dennis decided he missed Stephen and he wanted to see him again. And so one night he opened up the floorboards, he looked down, and there was Stephen, and Dennis would say it looked like he was dirty. So he pulled him out of the floor and he gave him another bath. And then after he had cleaned Stephen, he pulled him out of the water, he dried him off, and he put him in the chair. And then Dennis took a bath himself in the same water he had just used to clean Stephen. After a long soak in this tub, Dennis finally got out, he toweled himself off, he redressed Stephen, and then he forced him back onto the floorboards and covered him up again. And he would remain there for the next 7 months until Dennis finally decided to dispose of him by burning him in a bonfire outside of their apartment building. And then after the body was completely incinerated and gone, Dennis remembered thinking, I can't believe I just got away with murder. And so he would do it again and again and again, killing at least 15 young men from North London, all by strangulation or by drowning or a combination of the two. And after he killed them, he would keep them stashed in his apartment for months at a time, in his closet, in his cabinets, in his bed, under the floors, all over his apartment. He had these bodies. And while these bodies were in his apartment, he liked to periodically take them out to spend time with them. He would tell police he found corpses to be beautiful. He was fascinated by them. But eventually, in 1983, he had so many bodies stashed all over his apartment that he knew he really needed to expedite getting rid of them. And so he began cutting them up and trying to force them down his drain, which eventually clogged the pipes. And so when Mike the plumber showed up and discovered this meaty substance in the pipes, and Dennis overheard him talking about it, that night after Mike was gone, Dennis had gone outside and attempted to clear the rest of the remains from the pipes, but he wasn't aware there were still remains stuck in the pipe that led to his specific apartment. Dennis Nielsen confessed to killing 15 young men and attempting to kill at least 7 others, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Dennis never showed any remorse, nor did he show any desire to want to be free again. He actually said he deserved to be in jail for what he did. In 2018, Dennis Nielsen would die in prison at the age of 72.
That plumber was just doing his job, and then he pulls out a handful of what looks like ground meat, but is actually parts of a person. He spent years living like that and pretending everything was just completely normal. Knowing he had 15 more victims hidden around the apartment is just so gross. He was literally sleeping right next to them and even bathing in the same water. The thought of those eyes staring at him from against those bedroom wall all night is hard for me. He just kept them like they were old furnitures or something. That's a level of cold I'll never understand.
It's hard to comprehend really that someone would have this much evil inside of them. Also, I researched this case because I had so many questions. I think I have more now. If you have a queasy stomach, I would probably skip this video. We're also talking about a child, so if you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, shape, or form, please skip this video. I will see you in my next one. I mean it. I love you. August 23rd of 2016 should have been a day of celebration. Victoria Martins was turning 10 years old, but instead of birthday cakes and presents, that day would mark one of the worst horrific crimes in Albuquerque, New Mexico's history. A crime so disturbing that even seasoned law enforcement officers would be shaken to their core. Victoria Martins was born August 23rd of 2006 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She was a student attending elementary school, and by all accounts, she was just your typical 10-year-old little girl. She was living with her mother, 35-year-old Michelle Martins, and her younger brother in an apartment on Albuquerque's west side. Neighbors described her as helpful, silly, kind, and friendly, and all of her friends at school would say the same thing. But behind closed doors of that second-story apartment, Victoria's life was anything but normal. Her mother, Michelle, was a single mother who struggled financially, and she also really struggled with substance use. And because she was single, she was on dating apps, specifically one called Plenty of Fish. It was on that app that she met a man, 31-year-old Fabian Gonzalez. The two of them met online in July of 2016. 1 month later, Fabian would move in, and a month after that, little Victoria would be gone. Around that same time when Fabian was moving in, his cousin Jessica Kelly was released from prison, and Fabian thought, oh my god, perfect. Perfect timing. I just moved into my girlfriend's apartment. Come and live with me and her 9-year-old daughter. It'll be perfect. Reason why I say 9-year-old daughter only, by the way, is because Victoria's little brother primarily lived with his father, so he wasn't at home at that apartment all the time. Anyway, Jessica, a convicted criminal fresh out of prison, says, perfect, okay, I'll move in. And the apartment was already small to begin with, but now you have Victoria, Michelle, her new boyfriend Fabian, his cousin Jessica, all living there. It was crowded, it was uncomfortable. Not to mention, Fabian and Jessica were practically strangers. Needless to say, the environment inside of that house was an environment that would be unhealthy for any child to live in. Not to mention, we know Michelle struggled with substance use. Fabian did as well. So now he had random people coming in and out of the house constantly, inviting strangers over to the apartment to hang out and use substances, I guess. The household was very quickly becoming not only unstable, but also dangerous. And 10-year-old Victoria was caught up in the middle of it. In the days leading up to the crime, little Victoria had been so excited to celebrate her 10th birthday. She talked about it to her neighbors, to her friends at school, inviting everyone over to have a birthday party. All she wanted to do was have fun with her friends, eat cake, play games. And it breaks my heart. It like physically hurts my heart that that day ended in the worst tragedy. In the early hours of August 24th of 2016, police received a 911 call about a disturbance at Victoria's apartment. This happened because at approximately 4:30 in the morning, that morning, Michelle and Fabian were seen right outside of their apartment by a neighbor. Apparently, they told the neighbor that Jessica was inside the apartment with Victoria and that they had stepped out after Jessica attempted to attack them with an iron. After hearing that, that's when the neighbor then called 911 to report that something was going on. When officers arrived at the scene, they had no idea what they were about to walk into. They found Fabian and Michelle outside of the apartment while Jessica was inside with Victoria. Officers went to go and enter the apartment, but they couldn't because the front door was locked. That's when Jessica then attempted to flee, jumping out of the apartment through a balcony. She wasn't successful. She fell and broke her ankle. But in the middle of all of this, officers noticed smoke coming out of the apartment. They managed to get in and they realized that the smoke was coming from behind a closed bathroom door. Upon opening the door, officers discovered Victoria's little body partially wrapped in a burning blanket inside of the bathtub. She was pronounced deceased at the scene just the day after turning only 10 years old. And it was clear from the moment that they laid eyes on her that she was gone. There would be no saving her, because she wasn't all in one piece. Victoria's heart, liver, and arms were found in separate bags throughout the apartment, away from the rest of her body. 3 people at the apartment were arrested that morning: Michelle Martins, her boyfriend Fabian Gonzalez, and his cousin Jessica Kelly. All 3 were immediately charged with first-degree resulting in death, kidnapping, tampering with evidence, and contributing to the delinquency of a. The police chief at the time stated, quote, "This homicide is the most gruesome act of evil I have ever seen in my career." In the hours following their arrest, of course, officers sat down to talk to Jessica Kelly, given that she was the only person inside of the apartment when authorities first arrived at the scene. And according to Jessica, this is what happened. Jessica told authorities that the night prior, on August 23rd, Fabian and Michelle had left the apartment, leaving her alone with Victoria. She was supposed to be babysitting. While they were all alone, a well-dressed, middle-aged man with a Mexican accent entered the apartment and said that he was there looking for Fabian, and he was angry, saying something along the lines of Fabian owing him money. Jessica didn't recognize him, but she didn't ask any questions because the guy seemed to know his way around the apartment. According to her, she said that that man entered Victoria's bedroom, ended her life, told Jessica that she was going to be the person responsible for cleaning up the body, and then just left, just walked out. When Fabian and Michelle returned to the apartment, Jessica was scared to tell him what had just happened. She was too scared to tell Michelle, so she only told Fabian. Then Fabian told Michelle to go and cook dinner in the kitchen to distract her so she wouldn't go and find Victoria. Meanwhile, him and Jessica took Victoria's body to the bathtub and separated her into pieces to make her body easier to dispose of. According to Jessica, by the time that they had finished in the bathtub, Michelle had fallen asleep, and soon Fabian then went to bed, went to go join Michelle. Jessica stated that she then got really paranoid that Michelle would find Victoria in the bathroom, and she decided the only way that she would be able to get out of this would be to get Michelle out of the picture permanently. And then she got more paranoid that Fabian would also tell on her or tell someone what had happened. So she decided that she needed to get rid of him too. That's when she grabbed the iron, attacked them both. They woke up, they ran out, told the neighbor, and the neighbor called 911. That was Jessica's version of events, right? So then investigators talked to Michelle to get her side of the story, and Michelle says, yeah, Fabian and I were sleeping when Jessica woke us up by trying to attack us with an iron. We ran out, talked to the neighbor called 911. So her version of events is matching up with Jessica's, but when investigators hinted at the fact that they did not believe her, Michelle completely changed her story. And that's when she confessed. You're not ready for this? Michelle says, this is Victoria's mom, by the way. Michelle says, okay, look, there's this thing that I like to do often, and that is inviting strangers over to my apartment to do things with my daughter, Victoria, while I watch, because it's something that I'm into and something that I find gratification in. And that night on August 23rd, I gave Victoria some medicine to, quote, calm her down so Fabian and Jessica could have with her, end quote. And then Fabian and Jessica did things with her before afterwards ending her life while she, Michelle, her mother, watched. I'm sorry. What do you actually mean? Because so now Michelle's story and Jessica's stories, they're different. They don't add up. But investigators believe Michelle because she confessed that it was the 3 of them who did what they did. They thought, I guess, that that was more plausible than a strange man coming into the house like Jessica was claiming. So all 3 of them, Michelle, Fabian, and Jessica, remain in custody. Of course, when Victoria's story hit the news, the public was outraged. The governor called for a federal investigation, and then the mayor stated, quote, "We are heartbroken as we mourn the murder of beautiful 10-year-old Victoria Martins. Give your kids an extra hug tonight. #Justice for Victoria." The community came together in grief. A birthday memorial was held for Victoria on August 29th of 2016. 2 months later, on August 29th, a public funeral was held for her. But as the investigation continued, things started not to add up. The evidence was not matching up with Michelle's story. An autopsy was done, and when the results came back, they showed bruises, abrasions, and fractures all over Victoria's body, but especially around her neck. However, when the toxicology reports came back, there was absolutely nothing found in Victoria's system, which didn't really make sense given that Michelle was claiming that she gave her something to quote-unquote calm her down. Then add the phone records, and Michelle's story completely falls apart because phone records showed that neither Michelle nor Fabian were inside of the apartment when Victoria lost her life. She was alone in the apartment. The only other person with her was Jessica. But the biggest piece of evidence that changed everything was when DNA evidence was found on Victoria's back. A detective took over the case, and he was the one that noticed that because I guess somehow initially the investigators missed it. But the DNA was tested. It didn't match Michelle Michelle, didn't match Fabian, didn't match Jessica. It didn't match anyone. It matched no known person in Victoria's life. The DNA was from an unidentified male, a fourth suspect who has never been found. And knowing that information led authorities to believe that Jessica's story of a stranger, random man coming inside of the apartment could have been true, yet what really happened is still unknown. And I know you guys are probably wondering as to why Michelle Martins would confess to such a horrible thing that turned out to be false. Well, a forensic psychiatrist who evaluated Michelle provided a little bit of insight into why she would falsely confess. Quote, "This is a woman who, when she was pregnant with Victoria, she denied the pregnancy until she gave birth. So she has an exceptional amount of denial and a very shallow level of emotion. A psychological profile of Michelle showed that she has personality traits that made her susceptible to false confessions." And an attorney also stated, quote, "Michelle doesn't function at the same level most of us do. She has spent her life saying things to please people, so if you ask her something, she's going to respond in a way that she thinks you would like." So I guess she's just the kind of person who has a really difficult time accepting reality, and she would just agree to anything. So in the case that investigators were asking her leading questions, she would have likely just agreed to anything, but I don't know. I don't understand it either. So what really happened? Well, based on a reinvestigation, here's what authorities now believe occurred the night of August 23rd, 2016. They believe that things started to go wrong August 21st when Fabian attended a barbecue party celebrating Jessica's release from prison. They think that at said barbecue, there was some sort of disagreement or fight that Fabian was involved in, and then threats were made. Then they believe that the night of Victoria's passing, a man who was involved in that argument and or fight wanted to retaliate against Fabian, and they believe that that was the man who murdered Victoria at some point when she was left alone with Jessica. So Jessica's story of the strange man entering the apartment could be true, yet we don't really know because Jessica was on so many substances that she has no recollection of what actually happened. Investigators determined that Victoria Martins was murdered between 7:45 and 8:30 p.m. Witnesses apparently saw Jessica Kelly carrying Victoria into the apartment at 10 p.m. What exactly happened, however, literally still remains unclear. And if you were to go off Jessica's story, which is pretty much the only thing you have to go off, then it would have been her and Fabian who then did what they did to Victoria's body in the bathtub to dispose of it. So with much of the original narrative proven to be false, the charges against all three of them, Michelle, Fabian, and Jessica, were dramatically reduced. On June 29th, 2018, Michelle Martins accepted a plea bargain to one count of resulting in death. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison, but she was released in October of 2024 after only serving just over 6 years. Jessica Kelly also accepted a plea deal in 2019, pleading no contest to 6 charges, including reckless resulting in death. She was sentenced to 50 years in prison, but with good behavior, she could get out before then. Fabian's trial took place in 2022, 6 years after the crime. He was charged with reckless resulting in evidence tampering and sentenced to 37 to 38 years in prison for leaving Victoria in a dangerous situation and helping cover up the crime. Victoria's case stands as one of the most troubling failures of the criminal justice system in recent New Mexico history. She would have been 19 years old today. Instead, she never made it past her 10th birthday. That little girl deserved so much better. She deserved to grow up. At the very least, she deserved justice. And now, all of these years later, she still doesn't have that. It's baffling. It's so sad. Let me know, please, if you guys have heard of this. I honestly don't know how I haven't covered this case before, but yeah, I'm telling you, it left me with more questions than answers.
Michelle actually told the police she watched those people hurt her own daughter. How does a person even say something like that if it didn't happen? She just wanted to please the officers, I guess. But the details she gave are just heavy. Then you have this random DNA that doesn't match anyone they caught. There's a whole other guy out there who probably did the most of it. Feels like everyone in that apartment was just living in some alternate reality, while that poor girl was in danger. Her photos make it feel so much real. And I'm just sitting here thinking about that unidentified man who is still walking out there freely. And that's it for today. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and maybe comment down below which story was your favorite. You can click on this video, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.